Sustainable Economic Development.
Deputy Malcolm Ferry, Assistant Minister for Sustainable Economic Development.
Heath Harvey, Head of Local Economy within Department of the Economy.
Tom Holvey, Chief Economic Advisor.
And Thomas Brackenbury, Sector Lead for Aviation and Maritime.
Thank you. Welcome again to all of you. Can I say a special welcome to Deputy Ferry? I understand you've recently taken up your role. It may be a little while back now, but the first time I think you've been before our panel as an Assistant Minister for this department. So welcome especially to you.
Thank you.
Minister, we're going to kick off with some questions around the cost of living, if that's okay.
Of course.
So, first of all, thank you for inviting our panel to the Cost of Living Ministerial Group last month. Could you give us an update on the work of that group and what it does?
So, yeah, the Cost of Living Group is a ministerial group which consists of myself, Chief Minister, Minister for Treasury and Resources, Minister for Social Security and the Minister for Housing, as well as the Chief Economic Advisor and other supporting officers. We seek to meet every 6 weeks. That's not always possible, just due to ministerial kind of availability, but that's the aim. That's what we try to do. So we meet regularly, and what we try to understand is both the impacts of the cost of living, but also the causes of those impacts and why cost of living is particularly high in the island. We have had a focus on young people at different times. We've heard from various groups that work with young people and spoken to us about the challenges that the cost of living places on childhood and young families. We're also looking at the minimum income standard. That's a piece of work that's ongoing at the moment, and that's designed to help us understand what the kind of minimum acceptable, I guess would be the right word, acceptable income is to live in this island. And of course that income, as that work progresses and ultimately concludes, that income doesn't necessarily have to be income that's derived solely from work. That income can be, work plus benefits or benefits only, but it's saying, what is the sum of money that a family of two would need, a family of 2 plus 2 children, a retired couple, different types of scenarios, and how much they would need to live in this island at an acceptable basic standard of living.
And have you got a figure for that? Have you got any figures?
That piece of work is ongoing, and it's to report back.
We're hoping before the election,
Yeah.
is the idea at the moment. It's quite a big piece of work.
That's the thing.
Which will require a lot of footwork, I think, on the ground to do what's required to make it as sensitive to Jersey as it possibly can be.
How is that done? Is it bottom up, top down, in a sense? Where do you get that information from?
So
Leave that to-
both
leave that
solutions
to the
are
expert.
completely acceptable. What we're proposing at the moment is it would be a bottom-up approach. So that would include a number of surveys, and it would be for local residents to decide what is actually a minimum income. Sorry, what's a minimum requirement for a standard of living that's acceptable on the island. After that, you would then price those things up, and that would be very granular in detail. So that would include a minimum level of food every year, but it would probably also include you need a bed, but you're only going to have one bed every 15 years or whatever that happens to be, and that cost is all equated down into one figure at the end of that, basically. So it can be quite complex. It can, even though through its granularity, it can be a little bit a sort of brick to smash a nut sort of thing in some respects, because no matter what you do, it is quite difficult to get a really nuanced level. Yeah. But it has been done elsewhere, and I think it can be a very useful piece of work to understand where we are as an island and what is actually required.
So islands themselves can be more expensive anyway, just before we take into other wider economic factors. Have you been able to identify, a Jersey premium? What's the premium, if you like, the markup that you would get from living in Jersey versus the UK?
I don't know if we've got one overall kind of premium. Do we have?
No,
I was going to say,
don't.
because if you're looking at housing, the premium will be different to food costs. In food costs, I think, which is where we're probably most comfortable in understanding what that kind of premium is. I think it's about 10 to 14%.
Yeah.
On top of the prices that you'd see for food costs in the UK. For housing, I think, again, it depends which part of the UK you look at in comparison. But obviously, we do know that house prices in Jersey are higher than most areas of the UK, so the premium there would be different.
So I appreciate this may be not a perfect analogy, but in some French islands, for example, the French DOMs, which are fully French departments, that they would have a system whereby there's a premium. So civil servants working overseas would get an uplift in salaries. We can't quite say the same for Jersey. As I said, Jersey's not an equivalence, but is there an expectation in terms of salary earnings for professionals about when they come to Jersey, about what they should be getting in terms of an increase to meet that premium? And what's your experience about whether that happens in the private sector or in reality in the public sector?
That's a really good question. I personally don't know the answer. I don't know if Tom has.
I could go into a little bit of detail about it. So, in terms of the premium, it is difficult to assess. There's all sorts of different elements to it. But I think what we would say is average earnings on the island are higher, but also there's a tax calculation that gets brought into it as well. So, not just income tax as well. We pay less VAT. Well, we don't pay VAT. We pay GST, which is 15% lower. There's less commuting costs as well. Energy costs are generally lower as well. So, council tax versus parish tax. There's a whole basket of goods where things are actually lower in terms of the cost that is above the line, comes straight out of your pay packet approach. We did actually produce a calculator for the public sector where we were putting all these things in so that we could prove actually if you are coming over, you're not actually worse off. You're just looking at housing, you're not taking into account all the other elements where you're actually better off, like council tax, and you are also earning more than a like for like. So nurses at the same grade will earn more in the UK, and if they are on those higher salaries, the tax brackets start kicking in and working in their favour as well. So it's a difficult calculation to do because you've got to take lots of different elements into account. But coming back to your initial question, our average earnings are generally higher than a UK equivalent, but then also the costs that we meet are generally higher after that as well.
I was going to say, I don't know.
So Guernsey undertook a similar minimum income standard study only about 3 years ago. So we have got a comparable jurisdiction to compare and contrast with. And obviously that formed part of their thinking as well. So there is a complete piece of work that we can reference.
In Guernsey?
In Guernsey.
In Guernsey, okay. And can you talk, so clearly, depending on which income brackets islanders are in, there might be a different picture to be painted. So can you talk to us about whether you use quartiles, quintiles, and how that is reflected in the work of the ministerial group?
I'll again leave that to the
More than
officer that does that work.
more than likely, we'll use households as opposed to quartiles and quintiles. So we'll use single households, which is generally your base. Maybe dual parent, two children, that type of household. Obviously, the mix of households you can go on for a very long way because there are lots of different approaches.
But that's for your minimum.
So that's the minimum income standards, that's right. When we're doing analysis for things like cost of living, impact of tax decisions or whatever it happens to be, we'll use a similar approach. It will usually be trying to give something that's familiar to people to hear rather than using quintiles, quartiles, deciles, whatever it happens to be. So we would usually try and say this is what a single household would be impacted by. This is what two adults, two children will be impacted by. This is what a pension household would be impacted
Certainly
by.
that comes through when we're doing the government plan, the budget for the year ahead. That tends to be the model that we use, as in, so if you're putting tax up or duty up in a certain way, what will be the impact of that change on these different types of households?
Yeah. If we go back to the point we were discussing about different types of income earners, though, so there are, when you're putting the messaging out, saying to certain people, you might be better off in Jersey if you take things into account in the round, but there are clear. Have you established basically who the Jersey's model works best for? Because there are clearly people who are on maybe a lower income who might feel worse off in Jersey. They don't get access to certain paid services, for example.
So we didn't do that piece of work because actually it's not about what is happening in Jersey. We don't know what the personal circumstances are for everybody in the UK. And once you factor that in, again, you've almost got infinite possibilities. What we created was a calculator that people could use themselves. They know their own circumstances. They can put in what their like for like would be in Jersey, and therefore they can get their own calculation back out of it at the end. So there is a bit of an onus on people understanding their own finances in the UK, which hopefully they would do. But we couldn't possibly do every type of group of people because the combinations are just too broad. Everyone's circumstances, particularly financially, are so sort of unique to them.
So it's fair to say that this piece of work is partly to establish different households. What do you need to break even in Jersey, basically?
What do you need to live, whatever Jersey people think is a decent standard of living.
And so, just very quickly, the methodology around that is lots of interviews with focus groups, and so it is a case of bringing people round the table, and this will be done professionally, not by officers particularly, but bringing people around the table and asking them what they view is important. So it's a very subjective and qualitative survey in that respect. And, but it is people saying, yes, I think, television plus subscription to one provider is important to have a quality of life in Jersey. Having a car is important or not. And so it's through discussion and understanding what people think is right for people to have that you get that sense of how much do they need to afford. Because obviously you could be extreme in the case and we say, well, as long as you've got enough food and water, then you're doing fine. But obviously we know quality of life isn't just about feeding yourself. It's about having a life beyond feeding yourself.
Deputy Wilson, have you got any questions at this point?
There was just one thing I wanted to ask about. Birth rates obviously have an impact on some of the things that we've just been talking about, and there's been a lot reported recently about the drop in the birth rate. Given the fact that we're actually trying to stimulate the economy so that people do have a decent standard of living, create the conditions for people to do that, we hear that people are actually leaving, as well as the birth rate falling. So what do you think that can be done to actually retain and assist people in Jersey to ensure that they continue to thrive and flourish and grow and stay and be part of that contribution to the economy?
I think before I get on to what we're doing, I find this discussion quite fascinating. And I mean, one aspect is, I've lived 90% of my life in Jersey. People have always left Jersey. I went into the election. One of the things I was saying to people is I'm one of kind of 7 cousins born in Jersey. I'm the only one left living in Jersey. But they left in the 90s. They didn't leave in 2020s. They left in the 90s. It's the case that people do choose to live elsewhere. And as far as falling birth rates concerned, that doesn't, certainly on the education system, that doesn't automatically feed through to fewer people in schools. Because again, children arrive in Jersey through immigration. They don't just arrive through birth.
Yeah.
And so it's wrong to equate a falling birth rate with necessarily fewer children. But what it means is fewer children who are born to Jersey. And I think that then gives a question about identity and whether people, having fewer people born in Jersey, does that mean less of a sense of a Jersey identity? I don't know. It's a very difficult one to answer. As far as what are we doing to address it? Because I think Jersey will always have that problem of wanting to leave the island. We are a tiny island, and therefore your horizons are very limited. And especially when you're in your later teenage years and you're looking at your life ahead with excitement, I hope. One of the things I think we need to do in Jersey is have an offering that is wider than just one industry. So I know that one of the pressures that I felt and many of my peers in the 1990s felt was a sense of you have to go into finance, you've got your A-levels, you've got a degree, wherever you're going next, it's got to be finance. But not everyone wants to go into finance. It's a brilliant career. There are so many different career paths there, but it's not for everybody. And so one of the things which has been at the heart of the Future Economy programme since we brought it in a couple of years ago is trying to diversify the economy to create a greater range of career options for young people. Because I truly believe that if they feel that they can do an artistic career in Jersey, whether that's filmmaking or video game creation, whatever it may be, or it could just be art, then those who enjoy arts and would like a career in arts won't necessarily feel the pressure that they have to go and leave the island to have that career. The same with sports, or I know I've talked about medical technology. These are different types of careers which ordinarily wouldn't be available in Jersey. And by making them available, you're just more likely to say, actually, I don't have to go abroad to do this.
There's different offers for people.
Different offerings for people.
I think trying to connect it to the conversation we've just had around minimum income standards and the cost of clearly young people want to go and they want to explore different options and things. But I think it's more about the fact that people who are here already who want to create a life in Jersey are stopping having children, for example, or there are prohibitive issues that stop them from building their family and the affordability of what it is to have a family in the islands. That's really what we're trying to get to grips with and to try and just understand what you are doing or what you can do about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think housing is definitely, the cost of housing is definitely something that weighs on young people's minds, even at an age where they're not considering themselves buying housing, so 13, 14 years old. I think there's a narrative, and an understandable narrative, that I can't afford to live in Jersey because the house price is too high. So the government has done, and it brought in the 3% stamp duty on investment properties, which I think at the time did a very good job of kind of taking the pressure out of the housing market. That was being put there through very low interest rates, and therefore creating an investment bubble effectively in housing. With higher interest rates coming in and the 3% on top of that, I think we've seen investment buyers really move out of the market. Now that has created, so we have seen over the last year or so a decrease in the price of housing, a deflation in housing overall. That's definitely aimed at trying to make the market more available to younger people and to people who want to stay and live in Jersey. It is a double-edged sword though, because at the same time you now have fewer investors buying in. It means that those companies building housing developments have less chance of selling on those properties, which actually can have the effect of meaning that those developments don't go ahead. So you end up with housing not being built precisely because there aren't any investors. So I think that's one area that we've acted in. I think it's had a good impact, but I think we're now at the position where we need to say, is that 3% extra stamp duty now actually had an effect that has taken the market to the point where no new housing being developed as a result of that? And I think we need to look at that quite carefully.
In the past, of course, government was much more proactive in helping to young, families buy in Jersey with the state's loan. Is there a role, do you think, for Jersey's government to be perhaps more ambitious in facilitating home ownership?
So I think it's very interesting. I said just earlier, my parents bought their house up in the Culford Slough with a state's loan in the early 70s. I said that publicly earlier this week. And, I've heard that many times, parents who are able to buy because of the state's loan. So I think...
Could the states underwrite it like a development? Could they say, we're going to buy 50% of these homes and we're going to then sell them on to islanders who qualify under a scheme, and we'll get the money back over a period of 30 years?
I think there are many ways to do different schemes. I think the government can be involved in a scheme. There are different ways to do it. I think there's also another way, which is Jersey used to have its own banking sector. Another area where we have a lack of funding is in capital to smaller businesses in Jersey. It's very difficult to borrow off the ordinary retail banks. So I do question whether there may be a role in government helping to set up a bank in Jersey, which is there to help, in effect, another type of community bank, but is there to help capital flow into the housing market for young islanders and capital flow into small businesses. I think that's something, the chief economist may not like the idea.
No, the only thing I would say is when you try to intervene in the housing market from the demand side and getting people to the housing market, it generally has some form of housing cost inflation again. That's where we're not wanting to be, because it just actually recirculates the problem. It becomes a bigger and bigger issue, and we see that as evidence throughout the world, that if you're doing that from a demand side point of view, you're actually just making the problem worse. You're intervening and you get into a cycle where you need to put more into to then correct again.
I think what we're talking about is a facilitation, isn't it? So
there is a different element of actually allowing people to capital, and that is a slightly different point, but it's still on the demand side rather than the supply side, and that housing prices full stop is quite an important element.
At the end of the day, there's, very quickly, supply is everything when it comes to housing.
It's saying that the supply isn't coming forward because the private buy-to-let investors are not buying, but there could be a demand from elsewhere is what I'm asking.
Yeah. There could be where do you think the demand would come from?
Well, I'm saying there's demand probably from people who want to rent and people who want to as tenants, and people who want to buy but can't get the financing. So and I think that's what I'm asking, whether government and DIM even could unlock some development potential by underwriting.
I think government needs to enable development, and so I think I don't believe that government can do it all. I don't think Andium can do it all. I think you absolutely need to engage the private sector in that, and that's where you need to look at those levers, such as enabling some investment buying or taking the pressure off that. And yes, I think it is worth exploring, how can government working with banks or setting up a bank, how can it help with the capital side? But at the end of the day, supply is everything. You need to be building more houses in Jersey if you really want to bring the cost of housing down.
Can I just move to the...
the very part of your question, Deputy Wilson, was we understand that people are leaving the island, and whilst, particularly young people, whilst we don't disbelieve that, unfortunately we don't have really good hard quality data to substantiate that, and we don't completely understand if people are leaving, why they're leaving. So there is a leave us form through Social Security, which we need to encourage more people who are leaving the island to tell us why, as well as obviously remove them from the Social Security system. But you also said, what can we do to improve the quality of life for our young people here? And from my point of view, it's good quality youth services for young people. It's regenerating parts of the island like Fort Regent, so people have got engaging things to do, and an entertainment centre, because whilst buying a house is really important for lots of people, so is the rest of your quality of life about how you spend your weekends, how you spend your free time. So there are large parts of the island that have gone neglected for years, and we do need to do something to address that, the people who are staying here, and we do need to understand why people are leaving.
And that's where this kind of wider, there is no one silver bullet, and even things like an event strategy and things like this, to have interesting events taking place that make life in Jersey interesting and exciting, even things like that, or new licensing law which enables more hospitality businesses to set up and provide a wider range of things to do. They are as important, or they have a very important role as much as the actual cost of things.
So it's your point about enabling, what government's doing to enable those sorts of things. Can I just come to the other sort of end of the population need, as it were, in relation to the economic value that we attribute to ageing and ageing well? What actions do you think are necessary from your department to actually recognise even further the economic value that the ageing population can bring to the island, and where in the plans are you addressing that as well?
So we don't have a specific piece of work on ageing and the kind of age. We have a very big piece of work on the ageing economy. It's called the Future Economy Programme. We don't have a specific piece of work on just older people and their role in the economy, and it is something that perhaps we should look at. And I would encourage, I think, if we're unable to start that work this year, then I'd encourage the next minister to start a piece of work in that. There is huge value in older people in all sorts of different ways, whether it's through paid work in different areas, or whether it's through voluntary work, or whether it's through childcare. I know that my parents and my in-laws, played a huge role in enabling my wife and I to work by doing a lot of the childcare for my wife and I. But that's, people like that aren't available. Not everyone has both sets of grandparents living in the island. So then you get into the question of childcare costs and how can government help with childcare, which is something I know that the education minister is working on, but I back him on that because it's really, really important. So there isn't a specific piece of work at the moment. But I think it's something that perhaps we should look at.
What do you think of the economic concerns around the population in that regard? What are they?
Sorry, rather was just going. I think the minister in the next few weeks is going to have a meeting with the Institute of Directors, which I've been talking with them about how businesses adapt to this themselves and how they change their offer to be more inclusive of those people who are in a slightly different age bracket. And I think that's something where the private sector needs to take a lead with encouragement from the business, from government, rather than the other way around. So helping businesses to do that is a conversation we're going to kick off in the next few weeks, I think.
I think it's really important from, I often say, and I don't mean to say, I've said this to people very close to me, people who often retire and then just stop working. My anecdotal view, and from what I've seen around me, is that they seem to potentially decline health-wise more quickly than people who carry on, whether it's working in a paid way on a daily basis or working in a voluntary way. But I think the importance of keeping going is important for the individual as much as it is for the society as a whole. And there's a huge role for older people to play in our society. Wisdom brings a lot of benefits.
Minister, can I just ask on that basis, would you also consider meeting with Age Concern to understand the economic value? Because I think I'd agree with what's been said so far, is that there's clearly maybe an unmeasured economic value that the retired population provide. And of course, if we were then to have fewer older people, and then at some point in the future more young people, that there is perhaps that hidden subsidy which grandparents, great grandparents give.
My family's been subsidised by grandparents, no question. And I'd absolutely love to.
As well as, of course, the voluntary sector and the honorary sector.
No, I'd love to meet with Age Concern. I did say to the chair of Age Concern once when I asked his what the starting age for age concern was, and he told me it's 55. I said they need to change that. They need to move it upwards. I've just turned 50. I didn't like the idea that I'm falling into their age bracket.
55's the new 30.
On that, I think there's a housing development in St Brillard which is for over 45s, and I was like, what? When did that become the new bar? And just to finish maybe this section off, but of course Deputy Wilson may want to come back in. Do you accept, so you talked about young people choosing to leave the island for opportunity, but do you accept that there are some that feel forced to leave the island because they can't afford to live in Jersey?
Yeah, and I think they can feel forced to, and I think that can. So a lot of this comes from housing prices, I believe, that financial pressure. And so, as I said, I mentioned the kind of 13, 14-year-olds. I remember my daughter saying that when she was that age. That's how people were talking in her class. We can't afford to live here. So I think there is a narrative created which may be true or may be false or maybe somewhere in between the two, which then makes people immediately young people look outside straight away. So even if they possibly could have afforded, if they stayed here, got a job, and mortgages are adjusted in a way for Jersey values, the banks do that. So payments can be made. But it's just, that headline price, £800,000 for a family house.
But do you accept it's happening at all
Scares
levels?
people
You get
out.
people who
Yes, I do.
work all their life in Jersey, retire at 65, and then perhaps move back to where they originally came from.
Yeah, and that happens again because their children have left and their grandchildren are growing up in another country, so they will often move to go and live with their grandchildren as well. So.
Yeah. But do you accept there are people at all levels? It's not just young, and it's
Yeah.
people.
Oh, I absolutely do. I wish there was one gentleman yesterday, very quickly, I literally overheard in the park, I was walking to the park, say to his friend, they had obviously not seen each other for a while, he said, I'm leaving the island. And I'd love to have gone and just asked him why. He was a young man in his early 20s. No, it would have been inappropriate. I just heard you say but I did hear him say it, and I was really fascinated to have learned why. What was it for sending him away?
Okay, I think, there's other things in terms of, we talk about economic value, but also there's other concerns associated with an ageing population. From an economic point of view, what do you consider those to be, and how are you responding to those concerns?
So the biggest concern from an ageing population perspective is the healthcare costs. This is something that I see happening now. So talking about budgets for the years ahead, the ask from the health department is growing incredibly fast. And I don't say that in a critical way. I'm not condemning the health department for that. I think it's a reality. I think the speed of the growth of that demand from the health system is greater than I imagined. We started off with the Future Economy Programme. The work started under the previous Minister, Deputy Farnham. We carried it on and published it in 23. And I don't know if the chief economist who worked on all the analysis for that is as surprised as I am at how quickly we are seeing the ask from the health department grow. It's a combination. I know Deputy Wilson, you'll know better than me, but it's a combination of health inflation. It's a combination of worker costs. It's a combination of better understanding of science, which means that you operate in different ways. You have, especially after COVID, you have different kind of sanitation procedures, things like this, which just all add greater governance levels, which all add to the cost. But the cost is shooting up. I don't know if it's faster than you expected.
I suppose the question is, what's the economic solutions to some of those messy problems or sticky problems?
Well, I think it is the Future Economy Programme.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Just coming back to that. The Future Economy Programme originally wasn't actually really looking at it quite through the ageing population lens as it is now. So if you look at what's called the Outline Economic Strategy, which was published just before the last election, that doesn't really talk about the ageing population. That talks about fair, inclusive, international, etc., which are still major parts of what we're doing. What we did was refocus it in on this is the biggest risk to the island, and through that lens, we need economic growth and we need investment productivity to enable that economic growth. So what we need to do is those three elements. We need better productivity, we need new growth enablers for the economic growth and revenue side of it, but also a key part of the Future Economy Programme is the right size public sector. That's particularly the civil service, to enable where we are spending taxpayers' money, it is going to frontline services which are going to continue to grow and put pressure on. So I don't think we can get away from the issue that health will continue to cost more in the future.
So can you give us an example of where you would see an improvement in the productivity position, for example, where you think you can cut into that, that will make a difference?
From a health point of view, I wouldn't want to talk about the specifics.
Not
I think
necessarily health, but because there will be consequences
So
on the health improvements.
one of the big things that we're doing, so obviously as part of the fairness part of the agenda, the minimum wage has gone up to the living wage. What we've taken advantage of from that perspective is labour is going to cost a lot more. It will be costing 72% more in 2026 as a minimum wage than it did in 2022. That means that companies are going to be struggling to some extent, but they have to become more productive to be able to deal with that. That's not work harder, that's working a little bit smarter. What we're trying to do to sit alongside that is the Better Business Support Package, which we might come on later on, which is to invest in capital and skills to improve their productivity, to try and help them adapt to quite difficult circumstances in terms of higher labour costs. So that's a very specific, quite high profile, quite well-funded programme of work that has been put into place over the last 6 months or so, and will continue for the next 18 months as well. So that's a very specific element. What we don't want to do, we should not be in the business of telling businesses how to become more productive. We should be enabling them to try and become more productive. Government is not good at telling businesses what to do in terms of improvement, but where we can, packages such as what we've got, reducing red tape burden, making sure the civil service is the right size, which is another big part we're doing, so we're not competing for labour in the same way, are all really, really, really important elements of what we are doing.
I think very quickly as well was it comes back to diversification of the economy as well. So bringing in new parts of the economy which are highly productive parts of the economy. That was, I think, why previous Minister for Economic Development kind of brought in the medicinal cannabis industry. Alongside that, though, we're now seeing this medical technology sector developing, which in theory, if it works, should be high value, low footprint. The wind farm is an economic enabler that is being looked at through an economic lens principally, because can it provide extra income to the island that brings that productivity forward? I think we're in a position now where Jersey has to start questioning, yes, we're a small island, but do we need to start thinking big? You know, can we develop the port in a way which enables the port to become an economic enabler for the island? Can we look at, Gorey, St Catherine's? Can we end up developing them as marinas and so on? I know these are things that have been asked in the past, but the scale of growth in productivity that the island needs, I think, means that we need to start asking these questions about how we best use the resources the island has.
So are you saying that productivity is as a feature of expanding the capability that the island has in terms of its infrastructure as opposed to products and services? Is that what you're saying?
It's part of it, absolutely. I mean, I fundamentally believe connectivity is absolutely vital to a small island, to any economy. And those areas such as ports, etc.
Can we hold that thought? I just want to
yes,
note we're developing into an interesting area, and I can see maybe Mr. Brackenbury's itching to get in. But before that, can I just take us back to healthcare spending? So,
of course,
we've heard the comment and perhaps the policy about right-sizing government or right-sizing the civil service, but we've already heard that in many ways to accommodate increased health spending, that ministers are having to give up budgets that they wouldn't have otherwise wanted to do in order to make those savings towards health. Is it reasonable to say that the policy about right-sizing government is about right-sizing the public sector more generally, and that the health department is still part of the public sector? So the health department spending is still government. So they might not be called civil servants, although it does include them. But from a public's point of view, that is still government spending that's going on. It is the only solution, if we were to pursue that to its logical conclusion, is that we see more privatisation in healthcare, so that the user is paying more directly for the services they receive. And if not, what do you think the alternative is?
I can't give an answer to that because I'm not the health minister and I've not looked at health closely enough. What I would say from a purely personal perspective is I don't necessarily think that this... we have effectively a mini NHS in Jersey, kind of 100% government funded, working through that way. I do question whether a more insurance-based system might be better. That would involve private companies, but through insurance and government insurance, they get paid for the treatment they provide. I think that's more like the French system or the German system, which seem to operate, to be honest, when I look from a very distant perspective, they seem to operate better than the UK system. So I do question whether the actual system we have is the most effective and efficient system, but I am not best placed to know, and I know the health minister does a lot of work in that area himself, and that's, you know, the sort of question he's answering. Malcolm may have a view as well.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I just think health inflation is a problem in lots of other jurisdictions, and there are very few jurisdictions that don't have an element of health insurance within their scheme. So I think, you know, if you spin it forwards a few more years, there will probably be an inevitability that we'll have to find another.
But it's either dealt with either through higher national insurance contributions and or a private contribution where you take out a separate insurance.
Yeah, and I think, you know, so many other jurisdictions operate in that way, because that is the way forward, particularly at a time when costs are increasing everywhere. We looked at it about 10 years ago. We seriously looked at what the options were and looked at the models around the world, and we came to the conclusion then, when I was at Citizens Advice, that is the way forward. It's just, you know, where it'll reach a tipping point where that's what we'll need to do, otherwise it will keep sucking money.
I think there's something about I think when people talk about health inflation and they talk about health services, but the question relating to the Asian population is that one of the biggest costs to the public purse is social care provision. And so one of the things we're trying to tease out is, how do you address that economic condition that you've got an increase in social care costs, because you can actually control for inflation around pure healthcare costs in all sorts of ways, but particularly around social care costs, when you've got islanders living in the island dependent on services that need to be provided through government support. Do you need to look at social care as an economic issue in terms of the impact it's having on things like productivity and also the value, if you like, that we attribute to investing in or disinvesting in the needs of older people in the island?
I think it's very likely you absolutely do, and I have to say that I haven't, but I think we do. I think, and the interesting thing from a social care perspective as well is that I come from a very uninformed position on this, but I think there are probably also ways to mitigate it, mitigate the need in terms of housing again. So I do wonder, one thing I've said here before is we are not building many or anywhere near enough kind of smaller communities of housing for older people. And we see some fantastic examples, Maison Cabot in Trinity and Le Bacon in St John's. And that's where people, because they're small communities of older people living close to each other, being good neighbours to each other, can also help lift some areas the cost of social care, because effectively your neighbours are looking after you to some extent as well and helping. So I think when we think about designing communities in Jersey, we need to also think about how can we build in a way that can alleviate the burden on the state as well. It can't alleviate all the burden, but I think those sorts of housing developments can go a long way to alleviating some.
And what levers do you have in the economic department to be able to achieve something like that?
Not a lot in the economic development department. What I would say is I think we as a government should look at things, I think I've said it here as well, is it worth providing developers with lower rates of tax, effectively tax breaks, when they build certain types of housing? So, rather than just your flats in St Helier, if you get a tax break for building an over 65s living community, a tax break there wouldn't encourage them to then build that type of housing, because that becomes more profitable for them. So I do wonder if we can work with Treasury to look at a more nuanced way of using the tax system to encourage certain types of behaviours in the private sector. It's not something Jersey's used to in that respect.
That's a tax break from an already relatively low tax point, isn't it?
From a 20% tax point on developers. But it's because we don't have corporate tax. It's just one of the areas where we do have a lever. I don't know, Tom, from an economic perspective, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole host of different issues. I think there's a difference between economics, which will go across every government, every private sector thing, and then economic development and sustainable economic development and where we can intervene. So economics, of course, we want to look at the economics of healthcare versus social care, and then the value that you were attain to putting on social care versus healthcare and keeping people in their own homes. When you look at the economic development side of it, I suppose what we might look at is that the enablement of a social care sector that's as effective as possible, has as few barriers to business as possible, that enables them to thrive and provide those services within the private sector. That's definitely a growth sector, if you want to kind of put it like that, that we need to be thinking about from an economic development department point of view as well. The wider economics, of course, we need to be having those discussions about how we can be as efficient, how we can deliver what the best total system as an approach to everything is as well. So yeah, I think it's just looking at it in slightly different ways, economic development and sectors versus the economics of it all.
Yeah. Okay,
Thank you. We'll move on to a general section on travel, but because you've already introduced the possibility, Mr. Brackenbury might wish to talk about some of the economic opportunities that the Minister's discussed already at ports of Jersey. Could you give us maybe an overview of what you think the potential is for growth in that sector?
Well, as the Minister says, there could be an opportunity in exploring Jersey's expansive harbours estate and understanding commercial and economic development opportunities through them. So obviously, Elizabeth Harbour is Jersey's primary point of entry and exit for our supply chain and for visitors. And obviously, the Elizabeth Harbour redevelopment plan was given planning permission in October. As the Ports Policy Framework sets out, government supports the redevelopment of of Elizabeth Harbour as put forward by Ports of Jersey. There may also be, as the Minister said, opportunities to explore the redevelopment of certain other areas of Harbour's estate, and work would have to commence there to understand the scale of that opportunity versus any investment need. Within the context of the Ports Policy Framework as well, what the government also wishes to see more of is diversification of the sector in the blue economy. So we've had a number of cruise ship visits in recent weeks and months, and understanding how you could configure Jersey's service and customer offer to developing or emerging market segments such as that. Also, pleasure vessels over 28 metres. Ports has commercial partnerships with on-island agents that are looking to configure the topography of the harbour, but also service offers to understand how they can be better supported in that sector such as that be grown.
Can I ask you about the cruises? So there were 2 cruises recently which I know came in, but the tenders never actually came in for whatever reason. It could have been due to choppy waters, or they'd changed their minds. But is that an issue that we get cruise boats pull up, but they don't always materialise in passengers coming off those boats because of other weather conditions and the fact we don't have deep enough harbours?
Well, certainly, I'm not aware, Chair, of the circumstances you described there in that particular instance. I think because of the tidal range and certain natural constrictions around the harbour, it's difficult for larger cruise ships to berth. But again, I do know that it is something that Ports of Jersey is working with its commercial partnerships and other arm's length organisations such as Visit Jersey, yes to attract business of that type, but also to make sure that visitors have the best possible experience when they are on island, and understand ways in which they as visitors, as economic agents, can be activated within the local economy.
I think you mentioned natural constraints. Thomas mentioned natural constraints, and that's one of the things I think when I say about the island thinking perhaps a bit bigger is, do we need, I think we should be looking at, do we need to enhance the ability of the harbour? So in terms of removing some of its natural constraints, so it'd have to be through dredging, I imagine, the tidal constraints around the harbour, the depth constraints. It could also be by building the harbour further south. There are different ways to do that, but at the moment we're incredibly limited in the types of vessels that can come to Jersey. That stops us trading.
At what point do we make that decision?
I think we should be having those discussions now. I think Deputy, you will remember the 1990s is pretty much when the existing harbour kind of plan was built. Yeah. But as I was saying recently, it was, the harbour was built with a very small harbour mouth, a very small turning area, and extremely shallow waters. That puts massive constraints on the types of vessels we can take.
Yeah.
We are therefore limiting the harbour's,
Yeah.
by not addressing that, we're limiting the harbour's potential for economic development.
It seems much more viable than a tunnel perhaps to France, which we don't have a lot of control over.
Strangely, I don't know if it's more viable or not, but I think, you mentioned tunnel, that's still something I think Jersey should think about, because that would be the ultimate connectivity and probably the ultimate economic enabler for the island. But short of that, then I think we should be looking at the question of what role can our harbour play. I recently visited St Malo, and actually it was in Rennes that I met with a politician in charge of St Malo Port. He was very clear that St Malo's future is tied to, as a port, is tied to the Channel Islands' future as ports. And so that then raises the question in my mind, how can we partner and work best with St Malo to make sure that that port thrives and our port thrives at the same time? And so I think these are questions that we should be engaging in as an island.
And I would add that as well as sort of perhaps natural constraints, there are sort of natural advantages that Jersey has. So it's sort of geographical location, the idea that the airport is a short drive from the harbour. So if you're visiting the region, then you're a short distance from the airport and can take advantage of Jersey's very strong intra-regional and regional connectivity, and open and so, again, a facet of the ports policy framework is government saying that we want to understand ways in which we can leverage Jersey as a regional hub using those natural advantages.
It's about kind of the island becoming aware of the economic benefits of being better connected to Europe. And at the moment, we're not particularly well connected to Europe.
When we talk about the regional, but isn't that part of the problem now, is that we can't market the Channel Islands as a region because we don't have that inter-island connectivity? So
Well, not just the Channel Islands, but the Bay of Mont-Saint-Michel as a region.
No, I get that, but often the French, the Germans, they'll look at the Channel Islands as a region. They'll want to come to Jersey and then visit Guernsey or vice versa, perhaps do a Victor Hugo trail, whatever.
Yeah.
And is that issue that we can't now say that there is a Channel Islands marketing offering? Is that a problem?
We've never had a Channel Islands marketing offering, or if we did, it lasted a very brief time in the 1990s.
But I think tour operators would often just do that themselves. So they'd say, come to Jersey for a few days a week, and then it would include 3 days in Jersey, maybe 3 days in Guernsey.
That's true, and that does happen. That is how things are marketed. We do have connectivity between the islands, daily connectivity between the islands, both air and sea. And we are definitely working with organisations to encourage that connectivity. So, if you're visiting the D-Day beaches as an American tourist, come to the Channel Islands as well as part of that. That is something that has been worked on at the moment.
So we've got sea links between the Channel Islands every day, even in all year round?
I don't know if it will be throughout the year, but certainly Islands Unlimited at the moment are providing a daily service. And I believe it's going to be most of the year, if not.
Thanks, Chair. Just picking up the issue around connectivity, can I just come to Blue Islands and what's happening there? I mean, clearly there's been some difficulties in terms of their technical problems and their fleet availability. Can you tell us what conversations you've had and what progress you're making to make sure that they've got the appropriate aircraft to allow that kind of connectivity that you're talking about?
So, yes, I mean, with Blue Islands, they've been made very aware, and they were made aware by the public, but also by government, as to the concerns we had about their poor service a couple of months ago. I do understand the reasons for that poor service. They have a limited fleet of 5 aircraft, and 2 of them had technical issues. But the supply chain around small aircraft, or those particular types of aircraft, the ATRs, for reasons that really fall out of COVID, and I think some of the supply chain issues over the past few years, the supply chain has changed dramatically, and now a call for parts takes months to fulfill, whereas it used to take just weeks or days. And so they have, they had issues around that, but they have worked really hard. They've, acknowledged the problems. They've acquired new aircraft, which, again, by virtue of being newer, should have fewer technical issues. And they've worked hard to solve any supply chain issues that they have. They are now, as I understand, in a much better position than they were a couple of months ago. They have themselves put their hands up and kind of issued a mea culpa and apologised for that. I think that's the right thing to do. And we look forward to them providing a better service throughout the rest of the summer. As with any brand, their brand has suffered damage over the last few months. They have the benefit of being the kind of sole provider, Jersey, Southampton, things like this, which from the perspective of their brand has probably dropped in value, so to speak, just in people's minds. But because they have some routes which are kind of vital to the islands, I think as a business that should enable them to continue. But I'm encouraged by the way they've addressed this, put their hands up, and have had a plan throughout as to how they're going to move.
And in terms of the services that you're expecting of them, do you have confidence that the quality and the sustainability of that service will be ensured or assured, given some of the concerns that you've raised and some of the problems that they've had so far? I mean,
it's always a question for them. There is no agreement between Blue Islands and the government of Jersey. They are a commercial airline who operate commercially. I know people say, in the government in 2020, so 2 governments back, under 2 different chief ministers back, the government provided a loan to Blue Islands at the time to help them through COVID. But that loan, rightly or wrongly, I wasn't a part of that, I was in Scrutiny at the time, but that loan doesn't have any service elements built into it. So there's no kind of, as I understand it, there's no expectation as a result of that loan that Blue Islands provide particular flights. They do, I think there is almost an unwritten expectation that they provide the Jersey-Southampton flight, and they obviously provide medical evacuation on that, which is vitally important, and continue to do that, and they understand the importance of that as well.
Do you think there's sufficient competition around some of the routes?
Some of the routes may not support competition. I haven't done an analysis of that, but what I think is resilience is the most important thing. And whilst I know we have asked them at times, is it viable for you to put on the Jersey-Paris flight, for instance, which they are doing at the moment, and we are supporting that particular route in different ways. I would always ask that when we make an ask, it's not a demand, it's an ask. And if they can't support it because of resilience, then they should say to us, no, that's not viable. They said yes to the Paris route, so they do that knowing that they have the resilience to provide that.
When you say you support them in different ways, what is the support government gives to the Paris route?
From the Paris route, Thomas.
It's through the Better Business Support Scheme.
Yeah, it is just money from the Better Business Support Package.
And what's that predicated on?
It's through Ports of Jersey, so it's £1 million to Ports of Jersey per year for the next 2 years to help develop European connectivity.
Yeah. But what does that mean in reality? What does Blue Islands get for that route?
You'd have to double check. It's an underwriting. Apologies, it's an underwriting of the route.
So to make sure they make a minimum amount.
Exactly.
And at what point do we know whether that underwriting's kicked in?
We would tell you.
Yeah, so the Ports of Jersey are the people in the contracts. Obviously, we've given them, handed over £1 million for them to develop these routes. Yeah. They've gone into the underwriting process. I think it will be assessed at the end of this summer. We get reports in from Ports of Jersey as part of our governance procedures, but the terms will be at the end of the route, which I think is towards into autumn. Yeah. Then we will have an assessment period for next year as well. We'll understand at that point whether or not there was any underwriting or not.
So there are no conditions as such on the route to say you have to charge a certain, you don't say we want you to keep prices down and we'll underwrite any losses. It's just basically effectively saying to them, try and make a fist of it. If you can make it work, great, and if you can't, we'll just make the difference.
As I understand it,
so
yes,
that's effectively
that's right.
what we're doing.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask about the absence? You were asked in the States about it, but the absence of any compensation for delays in terms of the EU 261 or UK 261 scheme. Is that? Do you have a concern for? First of all, do you have sympathy for those travellers who find themselves put out by the fact there are cancellations, which would otherwise kick in for compensation in other places?
I have huge sympathy for all travellers who are put out when their flights are cancelled. It can be inexpensive and depending on the reason you're travelling, it can be traumatic. So yes, I've got enormous sympathy for those people. Most routes in Jersey, it has to be said, are covered by some sort of compensation scheme, and so it's only the inter-island routes that aren't, and it's also the Jersey originating flights to the UK or to Europe that aren't. I think it works out about 13%, just over 13% of passengers are not covered by a compensation scheme. So 13% of passengers that travel through Jersey's airport are not covered by the compensation scheme.
But that's the leg, though. So if you originate in Jersey and you go to the UK, if that's cancelled, you're not covered.
That's correct.
Only if it's Blue Islands.
Yes, on the Blue Islands ones. Sorry.
So you are on EasyJet or...
Do we know why they operate differently? Why is Blue Islands not applying the same?
Okay, so I'll read it from here. So UK and EU legislation provides cover to Jersey passengers travelling on all inbound flights to Jersey from those jurisdictions, EU and UK, and similarly for outbound flights on all UK and EU-based carriers such as EasyJet and BA. So in this case, it's because EasyJet and BA are EU/UK-based carriers
Where
that they
Blue
are
Islands
covered under
based?
those two. They're not UK-based, they're Jersey and Guernsey-based, so they're not UK-based.
Okay, so how do you resolve that anomaly politically?
Well, the question is, I think, one, you should do an analysis of it, because I think it's very easy, and I've been asked by the media a number of times about, should Jersey have a compensation scheme? I think it's important. When a flight is cancelled, at the moment, the carrier has to provide you with a refund on the cost of your flight. They do at the moment. So compensation is other costs on top of that flight refund. That will, in all likelihood, increase the price of tickets.
Of course,
if
they
you were to
refund. Of course, they
create it.
refund you if they can't provide a service. I mean, that goes.
Yes,
without
I'm
saying.
just trying to clarify that
Yeah.
a compensation scheme is for money above that refund. It's not.
Well, it's because it's compensation.
Oh, yeah,
it's
I'm,
not.
I'm just trying to clarify.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
not
it's
doing
fine.
anything else. And just because I think sometimes people think it's the refund, I think people sometimes think compensation is the refund. It's not. Compensation is
that's
above
right.
the refund.
Yeah.
And so I think we do need to do an analysis, and I'm happy for this to be done, of what would be an impact of bringing in a compensation scheme modelled on the UK/EU version. Because I think that's the only responsible way to look at whether we should bring one in or not, because we need to understand what the impact would be on the small carriers, because it would affect Blue Islands and it would affect Aurigny. And so the question is, we know they are very, very small carriers. We know that they have
Would the
just
effect
fleets
maybe-
of 5. So the
yeah.
question would be, how would that impact it?
Would
And
the effect maybe
are we
be that
happy
they
to
don't
carry those?
Would the
impacts?
effect maybe that they don't cancel as much? And
I don't know.
The jeopardy of
That's
having
why
to
you
pay
would want the
compensation.
analysis. That's why you'd want the analysis. I don't know.
Okay. But should they not just be playing by the same standards as the other airlines that operate in the islands?
Well,
I don't think that would necessarily. That's why I think it's the responsible thing is to do an analysis, because if you were just to put it on them, you may then see them go out of business, and I think that would be.
How would you get
outcome.
qualitative analysis? You presumably ask them with
this
you,
is
and they say
quantitative.
we
This
don't
is-
want it.
This is called no, a quantitative analysis of the likely amount of compensation that would be paid during any given year, versus with the impact on that on either ticket pricing or the business's own finances. Thomas.
Indeed, and I think it's also worth pointing out that both the UK and the EU law, they do set out. There are circumstances in which airlines do not have to pay out compensation for extended delays and cancellations. So if it was, for example, a strategic cancellation where an airline chose to cancel a service to optimise its schedule, that is something.
Can we? So we were short. We can take that as read. But
Yeah.
in the case of Blue Islands and Aurigny, Blue Islands for Jersey in particular, what time frame are we talking about for this analysis, and when do you expect that government will be in a position to be able to
This hasn't been
design?
a piece of work that we started yet. It's a piece of work that we could start. But like I say, I don't think it would be responsible to just bring in a compensation scheme without having done an analysis in the past, because it is likely that such a compensation scheme on such tiny airlines would have an impact, and that could be an impact that puts them out of business. Okay. So you could end up with fewer air routes as a result.
But that's essentially because they couldn't meet the minimum standards, isn't it? I mean, if they can't abide
That's
by.
if you take compensation to be a minimum standard. I don't. I take health, safety, technical things to be minimum standards. I think compensations, because you're making them into insurance companies that pay out on top of it.
It's
Do you
an
want to do that
industry
with your airline?
standard, though, isn't it?
It's in the UK and EU is what they've gone for, but they're much bigger airlines that they're talking about.
But surely the other operators would argue that's not a level playing field in terms of the Jersey operations.
But I think when it comes to these tiny air routes, you're not talking about a level playing field. So you will not get EasyJet doing Jersey to Guernsey flights. It's that simple. That's not going to happen ever. And so you need to have these tiny airlines who are willing to do those small, tiny routes. And they therefore have to operate in a different environment. Okay. So I'm not saying that it would harm them. Okay, I'm saying it'd be irresponsible to put that on them without doing the analysis first.
It wouldn't necessarily have to cover Jersey to Guernsey, though, would it? We could start by saying that Blue Islands should operate the same conditions as EasyJet, and if it's a UK arriving or departing flight that it should be covered by compensation.
You could say that. I'm saying it would be irresponsible without doing an analysis. Sorry, Malcolm.
I think the important thing to remember is lots of people have holiday insurance
That's the other
that they're not even aware of. If they book the flight through their credit card, if they've got certain bank accounts, it'll be an automatic feature. So the reason people don't use that when they have a compensation scheme available is they don't research those options. And of course, that is compensation that would be covered under lots and lots of holiday insurance schemes. So I think there is, there's a piece of work there to research and find out how many people would actually not be covered by the loss of these flights and what the cost to them
Given
would
that they
actually
book
be.
The
online
bottom
using
line here
cards.
is that there's a loophole that exists in Jersey, which Jersey people, yet again, Jersey consumers, yet again, don't have the same cover that you would expect in the UK or the EU.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But we are talking about smaller airlines and smaller profit margins.
I mean, part of the problem, part of an economic problem that Jersey finds itself in is driven by the fact that we keep adopting rules that are made for much, much bigger states than Jersey is. And so I think that's what you're suggesting here is let's take a rule from a much, much larger state, the UK, or massive states, the EU, and apply it to Jersey. You can do that, and you can do that without analysis. And I would put it to you, Chair, that would be an irresponsible thing to do. All I'm saying is that it would be responsible, given the size of these airlines, the tiny nature of the routes and the number of passengers that they carry, to find out first what the likely impact of such a move would be and whether that would put those routes in jeopardy. Because it might be the case that we could bring in a compensation scheme and then we would be the same as the UK and the EU, but we lose their routes as a result to Southampton and to Guernsey.
There are those that
that's
say
a possibility.
There are those who would argue that you'd never find out that information because it's hypothetical and that actually
I
it's
think
just
it can be
it's a
easily
political
calculated.
decision. So
I think you can make some models that work pretty well.
We could do something where
You could model that, no problem.
I think the research will come up with a political answer, which will be there's a lack of political will. That seems to be the answer we're
No,
getting.
I think, Chair, I'm not going to argue with you about that. I've just said my position is to bring in compensation without prior analysis would be irresponsible in my view.
So there's political will to undertake proper analysis.
I'm sure consumers would be reassured to hear that. Deputy Wilson.
Yeah, there was just if I could just make one comment. I think it doesn't really matter about the scale of it. It's the principle that when a service is not delivering for consumers, it's what sort of sanctions, what sort of levers does government have to actually improve the quality and the level of service so that people can have confidence in it. I think that's what we're trying to drive.
But that I think is where,
And the analysis would help, I think.
Sadly, principles can cost a large amount of money,
Yes.
and they can put businesses out of
I'm
business.
sure health and safety
And
costs.
so you can have.
I agree
appears
with
to
you,
me
but I
that
think the issue. Sorry, Minister. I think I don't think we want to get into an argument with it. I think what we're just trying to establish is that when you've actually got a corporation that's operating a business, it's relying on a local consumer footprint, that actually the standard of service that you expect to be delivered is consistent, reliable. And when that fails, there is clearly a cost to the consumer as much as there is to a cost to business. So we're just exploring the notion of what that compensatory framework or mechanism might look like. It may well be that it isn't affordable, it's not acceptable to consumers. So in some ways, I think
And
it would
that's
be
all I'm
welcome to have
suggesting
the
is that we need to
analysis.
do the
which be there.
analysis. To
Yeah.
do anything else, I think would just be, it would be. It could lead us into a very bad place in terms of air routes.
It
it's
could
just
also
that simple.
improve things
We both
as
want
well
the
in
same
terms of...
It could, but we don't know. Neither
Yeah.
you
No.
nor I today can know.
Well, it's arguable that until Jersey has the same protections, that the ports of Jersey shouldn't be offering any contracts to Jersey or Guernsey-based operators because they can't offer the same level of protection.
I think that's an interesting position to hold, and I'm pleased you shared it with us.
Can I move to the visitor economy? Just in terms of, it's been in place, the visitor economy strategy has been in place for over a year now. And I was just looking at the strategic intentions, and there is actually quite a lot of high-level things that can be seen and evidenced. But could you just give us your own view about what particular challenges there have been in terms of achieving some of those strategic objectives?
I think we're in, I've said before here and elsewhere, I think we are in a real transition period for the visitor economy in Jersey. I think that transition period has been precipitated by external events such as COVID, excuse me, and other external factors such as the changing travel market, but also internally within Jersey, the higher cost of wages that has been put onto the industry as well as a regulatory environment which has made it more and more difficult for businesses to operate, and more, actually change the word difficult to more and more expensive for businesses to operate in Jersey. So I think there's been a lot going on which the visitor economy has in some areas not adapted to. I think in some areas government hasn't adapted to. And I think we're in a position now where we're doing the right things, which are looking at the fundamentals of the visitor economy, and we're trying to put the right fundamentals in place to make sure it thrives into the future. But as a result of that, we're likely to see difficulties happening right now. And we see that in everything from, you know, a hotel closure or a restaurant closure to an air route stopping or things like this. And but I was discussing this with a colleague this morning. I firmly believe that we're doing the right thing by putting the fundamentals in place. And so they are things such as legislative things, such as licensing law, which will take away some of the regulatory burden. We are attracting hotel investment, which I think is really important because it shows that Jersey has an offering that people want. But we need to have the right hotel products which deliver the right value to encourage people to come here as well. And I think we are also working with the industry. So from the beginning of the visitor economy strategy, I think it's really important. We worked with industry throughout, and I continue to work with industry on this. We set up a working group where working with members of the Jersey Hospitality Association and others, meeting on a monthly basis, where we are saying quite simply, we need complete honesty in the room. We need to talk about where the problems lie, because they lie on all sides. And therefore, how do we work out how to move forward from this? You know, one of the things we're trying to encourage hoteliers to do, because we've seen it working, Visit Jersey have seen this working, is creating more packages, which effectively in one way or another add value to the room that you're selling. So that could be through a discount, or it could be through a bottle of champagne thrown in, or half price to an attraction, things like this. But they sell really well. We saw in February a modest increase in visitors, but that was driven by packages that were being sold. We saw the same thing happen in November, an increase in visitors to the island, but again, driven by packages.
And is
But
that,
we know that there's a culture in the industry
Minister,
where
can I
they're
just
not used to delivering
interject?
that.
Are those packages effectively being sold by the businesses themselves? It's nothing to do with Visit Jersey.
Visit Jersey was the enabler on this, so it was Visit Jersey actively going around and asking. And they, I believe it was with BA Holidays or BA Global. I stand to be wrong. They put the two together. So that Visit Jersey kind of went to our hospitality sector and said, look, if you can get holiday packages together, if you can come to us with packages, we can get them sold via an operator in the UK. Right. And so Visit Jersey did absolutely play a key role in making that happen in the first place.
Okay. Just to clarify, we're interested in what organisations that receive government funding do rather than private businesses.
Yeah, no, so this was Visit Jersey.
So
it was Visit Jersey's initiative. They went to they thought it up. They went to the industry and they did
interjected.
that.
Thank you.
No, absolutely. It's right, because it was Visit Jersey.
So, I mean, obviously the numbers in terms of the visitor numbers have been in the news in terms of the performance. What's your assessment of that? What sort of response would you?
A range of factors. I mean, it's difficult because I'm genuinely working very hard, both personally and as a team, with the visitor economy as a whole, and particularly the hospitality sector. And like I said, I believe we are doing really good work, which is going to pay off. But it's going to take a little bit of time for that to come in. There are a range of factors. Locally, I think we do have a high cost base. It does make Jersey's proposition expensive compared to other jurisdictions. We also, therefore, if we're going to be expensive, we have to have the product which people are willing to pay for that. We do, in some places, have excellent examples of the right product, but we also have examples where it's not the right product given the cost of coming to Jersey. We have UK downturn in terms of consumer confidence. That we can see in peer jurisdictions, so to speak, that rely on visitors from the UK. So we have seen the number of visitors from the UK to Ireland has dropped by 14%, 13 or 14% in the first quarter as well. We've seen similar, figures coming in through here as well. The DFDS tender process lasting longer than we would have wanted it to absolutely affected the ability for tour groups to book. So that has had an impact, a negative impact on some of the tour groups coming to Jersey and the numbers that would come through there as well.
How long do you think that will take to correct
I would
itself?
hope that would be resolved by next year. I know that DFDS themselves are working, they're setting up DFDS holidays, and they're bringing that in, and that is to help sell tours and packages throughout Central and Northern Europe, or throughout its European base as well. That would include France as well. So we're seeing them step up and take on the burden also of working with tour groups to bring them to the island.
Do you think the uncertainty around the Battle of Flowers has had any impact on visitor numbers for the summer?
I don't think the uncertainty around the Battle of Flowers will have had an impact on that. I don't believe that will be the case. But what I would say is that the Battle of Flowers can add value to the island in that week. That is kind of one of our few peak weeks of the year. And I think the Battle of Flowers can add value there. I don't think the uncertainty around it will have stopped people
Do
booking.
you not think there were people who were looking to book, they come over every year and they thought by March, there's no Battle of Flowers this year?
I'm sure you can find someone who has, but I don't think the aggregate of that would be large enough to move the needle, for want of a better phrase.
So you think if we had a situation every year where the bailiff's permission for the Battle of Flowers hadn't been granted until maybe a week before that, is that okay? Is that going to...
It's not for me to say. This is about health and safety things and regulation in that
Well, the
respect.
grant-
I'm not...
Yeah.
No, the grant's there for them. I'm sorry. There's nothing about the money side of it, which is a problem. The bailiffs panel works with the health and safety executive to decide whether they are happy to put something up. I cannot talk about that.
The
or
grant
say
was
whether
only...
they're making
Can we
the right
move on to
decision.
the Battle of Flowers, perhaps? Is that okay? So in terms of the letter, I know this did come up in the States at our last sitting. It is fair to say that this is still a fairly last-minute decision, isn't it? In an ideal world, you'd have a long lead-in period where there's certainty about the event, and we know exactly what the format's going to be. But so, could you talk us through the letter of instruction, perhaps that you wrote on, I think, the 23rd of June? Just to clarify, you've addressed it, dear Richard. I presume that's to Richard Corrigan,
Yeah,
Chief Officer.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's right.
Not to anyone else.
I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but I can say the letter of instruction was written entirely for the purpose of making sure that all my officers felt comfortable in working with an organisation that didn't exist a few months before that letter was, or even a few weeks before that letter was written. It's nothing about, there was no sense of discontent amongst my officers. In fact, I did say this should probably come from someone else. Tom.
I don't know if Heath wants to
Oh,
say.
yeah, sorry, I forgot about Heath at the end.
I think
So
that
Heath should talk about why the letter of instruction was sent.
It's easy to misperceive a letter of instruction as highlighting a disagreement between an officer and a minister, and that isn't the case. It's an acknowledgement between the officer and the minister of where there's risk or unknowns, and it gives everyone the comfort that, in this instance, it was a couple of 100,000 to a group that had recently formed, didn't have a track record, and weren't known to us. So you have to have an opportunity to pause and do a degree of due diligence or assessment on their business plan and what have you, and proceed with caution. And so that is an acknowledgement between officers and the minister.
Well, that's one way to perceive it. What's
That's
really
the entire reason it's written. It's
what's
not one way
really
to perceive
happening,
it.
what could be seen as happening here is that it actually puts the burden of responsibility on the minister, doesn't it? So if this all goes wrong and it's proven that this isn't a good investment for whatever reason, ultimately the civil servants are covered here because they're not the ones who have made the decision. It's required that specific instruction from the minister, go ahead and do this. And look, we can read it. It says that, the minister says, I've considered the pros and cons and I wish to proceed, even given the fact that, of course, this is a new entity, which might have excluded it, I suspect, from a process that the minister didn't have any direct involvement in otherwise. He's basically saying, I'm taking political responsibility if this all goes wrong. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct in that respect, yeah.
But normally, if the officers were in agreement, you wouldn't have needed to issue that letter.
No, the officers weren't in disagreement, but we know, officers and myself, know that from the public finances manual perspective, a new entity like this is something that would not ordinarily be funded to the extent that we were. There was no other way that I knew of to put the Battle of Flowers on this year, and we had a group of willing people. And I think in Jersey we have a strong community of people, and we should support them where they want to put on something like this. And so that was me just saying, I understand that the Public Finances Manual may look at this particular proposition negatively. Therefore, I am saying to you, you have the comfort of going ahead, because I think it's what we should
But hang
do.
on a minute, the Public Finances Manual can't make a decision, can it? It's an inanimate object. So what you're saying is that the officers reading the Finances Manual couldn't have signed this off because it wouldn't have been legitimate to sign this off from their point of view.
It could have been more difficult to sign off, I think, would be fair.
Yeah, I think the lead time, you know, you work with a lot of, you work and support a lot of deliverers of events. And in this instance, this is a significant size of event with very little lead time and a new group of people behind it. So you've got to tread with caution.
So what would your advice be based on the application and the Public Finances Manual? What would your advice have to have been as an officer about whether the grant was to be issued?
We were happy to support the event once we'd met the group, but it was, you know, there are more unknowns than there are knowns when you're working with people you haven't worked with before, and they're downscaling the event, putting it into a new route. They've got to prove their competence to the bailiffs panel. All of those are hurdles that they're controllables that are not within our control. And so it was just, Minister, let's commit the money, which the Minister did, but, you know, go forward with caution. Because
you weren't telling the Minister was telling you to commit the money, not.
No, we have a conversation with the Minister about all these things that where, you know, we're highlighting risks to him, and he's you know, acknowledging those risks, and it's a, you know, it isn't a working environment where you're told what to do. You highlight risks and opportunities to the Minister on everything we do every day.
We have an excellent working relationship.
I don't know why it
it
needed a letter. That's what I'm getting at. Wouldn't a verbal instruction to say I've taken all that into account, just go ahead and issue the money? Wouldn't that have been sufficient?
I think from the Public Finances Manual perspective, it's good governance to have a letter in place where you have as many unknowns and potential levels of risk in an event that we had with this one.
And when was the last letter like this that you remember being issued for such an event?
I think there's probably a couple a year, but I think people think there's something exceptional because there's not many of them. But then, you know, quite quickly with the entities you work with, you develop a track record.
So you've had a couple of years from this Minister issuing.
I don't
No,
know.
departmentally.
But what I have said is we should probably write more letters of instruction, because I think one of the problems is because they happen rarely, people then try to look into them, what isn't there, which is what I feel is happening here. And if I just did letters of instruction on a more regular basis, then they would become normalised quite simply, and people wouldn't try to look for things which aren't there in the letter of instruction, because that's what's happening in this case. It was a perfectly reasonable thing to do from a good governance perspective.
It's bureaucratic to issue a letter of instruction just for something you all agree about.
I want my officers to feel comfortable, and that's how we work. And you know, we work extremely well together. And in fact, disagreement is something that's incredibly rare between me and my
So one of the questions that came up was that we're clear that this money is going to a new entity, but the exhibitors themselves in the Battle of Flowers are probably pre-existing, long-standing exhibitors. And
another reason why I felt comfortable issuing a letter of instruction.
Is any of that money actually going to go to pay off some of the debts that the exhibitors would have incurred last year? How do you know that?
Well, it's not intended to do that, and they know that. And this is one reason. So we haven't handed over, and I think this is something else Keith can talk to, we haven't handed over a block of money to them. We are effectively giving it to them on the needs basis. So I think it would have been very difficult for them so far to have diverted some of that money to
we have a business plan for them. Like all grants, they need to the sum total has to be broken down in a bottom-up budget to explain where they need that money. And you know, if they needed money for glue, as they did 10 days ago, and we're talking about thousands of pounds of glue, they will present the detail behind that. Say, here's the order, here's the invoice, and what have you. We've got a cash flow issue. You need to support us on this. And we'll say, okay, this is on a critical path, something that's going to become an issue for the delivery of this event. So we will support it, but as the Minister says, we haven't issued the grant in.
A question on going back to what you were talking about around advice to ministers, Heath.
Yes.
Did at any point in time, did you ever offer any advice on whether the investment that the Minister was prepared to make would actually guarantee a return on that investment? Did you have any concerns about it? Did you have any worries about all of this money being given to a new entity with a view that this may not actually, have a return economically, either in visitor numbers or revenue?
I think with every new grant you issue, there is an element of risk, and that's why you establish in the grant agreement KPIs so that the recipient understands how the government and the people of Jersey expect to get their ROI from that grant. So in the case of the Battle of Flowers, there are thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of man hours that go into this event in the sheds through the winter and what have you. That's the unseen bit. We're not focused on the journey here. We're all talking about the battle itself, the destination. And there's much more to the Battle of Flowers in terms of a social ROI. So that's huge, happens through the year and is thousands of hours. It all culminates in this wonderful event. I think, because they were a new entity and it was a different route and a different scale of float and everything else, we create a set of KPIs in that grant where we stipulate the number of floats we expect to see and what have you, because it isn't take the money and give us your best endeavours. And when 4 floats turn up on the day, we all say that was underwhelming. We have an expectation of what good value for money consists of. We do this with every single grant that we're challenging. We expect value for money, very often these grant agreements, in drawing them up, there is a negotiation where the recipient says, we can't do that. And we say, well, that's because you don't have somebody doing your social media for you. You need to bring a volunteer into your organisation, because today we all expect to be able to look on Facebook in Jersey and see what's going on in our island and what have you. And so we push the whole time. We don't settle for mediocrity and for the bare minimum. We say, no, we want to see this number of Facebook posts and this amount of promotion and this number of banners around the island and this number of floats in the parade and what have you. And that way you end up with something that I think we can be proud of and does deliver value for money. But in every new grant,
and do you believe that
we're
you've actually got that in place with the commission that you have with the new entity?
Yes, and I think if the same entity were there this time next year, they would find that the bar had risen, because we're not here to see them fail. We've put hundreds of hours of officer time into supporting them because they've been late coming to the table. So we're desperate to see this succeed, but we're proceeding with caution. And when they deliver something great this year, which we all hope they will, we will have a post-event sit-down, as we do with everybody who receives a grant, and say what was good, what was bad, and what was indifferent. How can we work on the weaknesses and make them strengths for next year? I think on the whole, there's some really good harmonious relationships. They're partnerships, these grant agreements, and they're designed to get the best for taxpayers' money, and to be objective, so people can look at those KPIs and next year say, right, we want 5% more here and 10% more there and what have you.
Can I ask?
I think just quick. Sorry.
Sorry, Minister. I was just going to say that we know who the previous chair was. It was Russell Labby chaired the previous group. Who's leading on this new entity? Is it a person that we?
There is a person. I don't know what the protocol is about naming individuals in scrutiny in that respect.
I'm just saying,
being
in
a
the
small
past,
island, I'm obviously happy to tell you who it is, but I don't know if I should do it.
I just don't know why it's secret. In the past,
it's not secret. I just don't like to land people.
It's just in the past.
People don't tend to love suddenly appearing in the scrutiny hearing, if you know what I mean.
No, it's not that. I don't even know who it is. It's strange that we've gone from a scenario we had a very high-profile chair of the previous Battle of Flowers, and that now we've got an organisation that's come out almost of the ether, and we don't know who's leading that charge, if you like.
So my understanding is that Battle of Flowers will soon have a general meeting of some sort, and this person will likely, or is hoping to become chair of the main Battle of Flowers Association at that time. At the moment, the chair of the existing Battle of Flowers Association is, as I understand it, still former Deputy Labby. But that is likely to change. And the person involved, from this perspective, the only reason I won't say it here is just purely because I think it's a bit unfair to suddenly name someone in the
middle of public scrutiny. This does raise...
I will happily tell you their names after this.
It does raise some questions about the clarity around... We still have it seems that the situation from last year still hasn't been resolved. So the reason I ask about exhibitors is that there's exhibitors who are potentially still owed money by the central organisation, and that if they're exhibiting again this year, when they've already got debts, I'm trying to find out how the grants that they're going to get from this money that's being paid by government is going to work when they're already potentially carrying debts. And I was wondering if that was considered in the giving of this grant.
So there's a blend. Some exhibitors are owed money by the old entity. Some exhibitors owe money to the old entity. So the fact is, to put a battle on this year, we had to get the right amount of money to them in stage payments. And I think the additional dimension that we've got this year, having a battle around town, is we've got 17 retailers who have been part of the process. You'll see one through the window there where they've got displays outside their shop. They're very much part of battle, and that is going to bring a real vibrancy around town. So, retailers should see a huge boost from over these 2 days, and they very much feel part of the whole
I get
event.
that.
We're
But
tying town, and I think it could be a really exciting parade which kind of breathes new life into the battle. That's the hope. We won't know till it takes place. But the fact that we brought battle into town, I think people will be closer to it, which is something that people have complained about a lot, was their distance from the battle parade in the past. The fact that retailers are changing their shop fronts to become part of battle shows again the community getting involved in a way that it hasn't done so much in the past, because battle's been out on the avenue. So I think we're at one of those positions where you could have something fantastic come out of a point of difficulty. And so often when constraints are placed on something, it actually comes out with something innovative and different. And I think that's where we are at the moment. And I'm looking forward to it. But yes, we are. I mean, what I would say from a governance perspective is that we are working with them to make sure that the money that is paid to them is paid to them on as needs basis. That it's not paid. It hasn't been paid in one big lump sum. And we are supporting the battle in different ways. And that's partly because whilst it may or may not, we don't know, impact visitor figures, the social value of battle, it touches thousands of families around the island who get involved every year in building floats and so on. And that is something that meant if you just dropped battle, I think would create a huge social hole.
We fully understand that. I suppose that if I finish on this question, it's a wider question. So the starting point is that the counterfactual. So if you were to give anyone around this table £160,000 and say put on an event and add value to the economy, we'd probably all be able to do that to some extent, greater or lesser extent, in the economy. And I suppose the question is about if in the future, what is the granting process going to be? Because I think you probably get quite uncomfortable, even as minister, having to get involved directly in signing off grants. And so if it wasn't the Battle of Flowers and it's a new entity would have come to you or the department 2 months ago and said, look, we want to put on this event, new events, can you give us £160,000? There would have to be a process which is legitimate and stands on its own 2 feet.
We have that process in place at the moment, and Keith, you govern that process directly.
Yeah. So we have an application on gov.je where there's a grant window and a framework, and all applications are looked at simultaneously. So grants don't go to the person at the front of the queue or the noisiest. They're assessed objectively against weighted criteria. Officers put together a list after a close of a window. Take a list to the minister, present the scoring, say that this is our recommendation that these events or initiatives need to be funded, and that's how it works. So it's very black and white. There's not much.
Should it even come to the department though? I mean, are you looking at a process whereby, for cultural events, that could be something even more arm's length? So you'd actually delegate it to an arts council or something, for want of a better word.
I mean, it already is. There's a blend going on, and part of that is because I think you don't want, in my view, to have one gatekeeper. Okay, so I strongly believe that in all elements of the economy, but particularly in arts and culture, innovation comes from people coming up with ideas, and you want to enable those ideas to take place. And so, yes, government gives grants directly. Art House Jersey gives grants. The Art Centre gives some grants. The JCF gives grants through obviously lottery donations as well. There is already a kind of landscape of different grant avenues, and I think that's really important. I don't think you want just one grant avenue, because then the person who becomes the gatekeeper, and by having a differing landscape, you have different gatekeepers effectively, which means that you have different views on what is the right way to go ahead, and that diversity of thinking is vital to the economy, and particularly vital to arts and culture.
It may make it difficult to programme, of course, if you've got lots of different groups.
This is always the balance. You know, I wouldn't want government to be the sole grant giver, but equally I wouldn't want Art House Jersey to be the sole.
I'm just
grant
wondering,
giver.
the question is, should government be involved at all? It seems a bit Soviet, you could argue.
We try to make it
communist.
we try to make it as little Soviet as possible in terms of a black and white process where, you know, we're not and Heath's recommendations and the officer's recommendations aren't necessarily about, you know, do they like this type of event or not from a personal perspective. They're about the likelihood of the event being successful and
Their alignment to the arts strategy, their alignment to, you know, heritage strategies, whether they're part of our culture, long-standing culture as an island, those sorts of things. So, you know, as I said, it's weighted criteria, and somebody would have to do it. We also hope that in funding events, they'll return something by way of social social ROI, sorry, and economic return on investment to the island. So it really is a blended mix. And, you know, your point about how many can you have, you couldn't have the air display and the Battle of Flowers on the same day. So there's a coordinating function there. There's the event legislation, which is a department we're working on and bringing forward. So I think there's a lot in that space. We're certainly, it feels to me, getting more right than wrong, and we've evolved a lot in the last 3 years in terms of how that 1% for art, culture and heritage is spent. And I think, you know, most of the people who are receiving grants today are quite comfortable that the system isn't opaque. It's very clear what they have to do to win that money. And we have, on the whole, good quality, constructive conversation with grant applications and grant applicants and recipients.
I think just quickly as well is Jersey does need an events landscape, both sporting events, arts and culture events, and all sorts of different events. I think that is one way from a visitor economy perspective that we fill the shoulder months in particular. So in that sense, you'll also need some tentpole events. You know, we're looking at the marathon and the Super Tri as one of those sporting ones at the end of September this year. But it's one of the concerns I have is that we may be, and this isn't my department, I need to look in other departments for this, but I do worry about the regulatory burden on event organisers. So I do worry that we are now removing so much risk from events that the cost of removing that risk is making the events too costly to put on. And I worry that, again, Jersey might be going down a road where we're taking rules that are being principally made in the UK, but will also be potentially made in the EU, and adopting them in Jersey. And actually all it does
You
is
say
mean
that,
we
but if
can't
you go to a
events on.
French festival in a square, you don't feel a heavy security presence like you do at a Jersey festival.
I mean, I understand that we've, you know, for some of the sporting events this year, I believe we might have been asked to put in counter-terrorism police officers, and it's hard to understand why. But I haven't looked into it, and I need to. But, you know, I do have to question why we are being asked to do those sorts of things.
Yeah. It's about the feel of an event, I suppose, isn't it? Well, Minister, I think we've come to an end. I will give my colleague Deputy Wilson maybe a chance to ask if there's anything else.
No, there's nothing. That's fine.
And do you have anything for us?
No, thank you.
Thank you. It's been fairly wide-ranging, and we probably haven't covered everything, but thank you to all of you for your time. And if we don't see you before, and wish you, hope you have some time over the summer to have some holidays.